Hey, I'm Andy Brassel. Thanks for joining me. And this month, I wanted to discuss if Belgium will be the next big feeder league for the Premier League in England. Now, perhaps you're sitting there thinking, hang on, Belgium's fed the Premier League enough in the past anyway, but not really in the way that I'm thinking, because I'm talking about players coming direct from the Jupiler Pro League into the English Premier League. And that's something that we've not really seen that much in the past. Now, I think if we rewind 13, 14 years to the exception that's proved the rule, the big two that we're all thinking of before we go anywhere, Thibaut Courtois and Kevin De Bruyne, who both made the move from Genk and his very productive academy to Chelsea. Courtois in 2011 and De Bruyne a year later, despite being slightly older, in 2012. Now, I think Courtois is an exceptional case, and his talent really, like a lot of other players where we can't fit them into any sort of development category like Erling Haaland or Jude Bellingham, I think he really stands up on that sort of level because I'm not convinced that Chelsea bought him as anything other than collateral when they bought him in from Genk at the age of 19 years old, where he was already an established first team regular, where he'd had a massive influence on them winning the Pro League in 2011. And then he came over to Chelsea and was loaned out almost immediately to Atletico Madrid. And what that said to me at the time is that Courtois is not necessarily a player for Chelsea's first team future, but a player as collateral. And there are a lot of players like that at Chelsea and at Manchester City, if we go back 10 plus years, because really both of those huge clubs, as a way of making themselves financially fluid, really develop players, not just from their academies, but future talents that they would invest in as collateral rather than necessarily for the first team. Ways to make profit, essentially. And I wonder if that's what Courtois was, because he went to Atletico Madrid. And of course, we all know how brilliantly he did at Atletico, even if the fans don't really like to remember it now because he's a Real Madrid legend. In those 3 years, he was loaned to Atletico. And remember, it wasn't a 3-year chunk that he was loaned to Atletico, but 1 year, then extended to another year, then extended to another year. And he did some incredible things as he turned from a teenager into a 20-something, winning La Liga, winning the Copa del Rey, the one that kicked it off for Simeone, winning the Europa League and getting to that Champions League final where he said goodbye to Atletico in Lisbon in 2014, where they didn't quite get it done at the last, conceding that late goal to Sergio Ramos and then losing in extra time, of course. But I do wonder if it was ever the plan for Courtois to come back and be part of it. It's just that his talent spoke so eloquently for him that's why he got those 4 years at Chelsea afterwards, in which, of course, he was exceptional and became one of the goalkeepers of the Premier League era. Now, De Bruyne was a very, very different type of trajectory, of course, because he never made it at Chelsea. He arrived there in 2012. Loaned to Werder Bremen, where he performed really, really well. And of course, he always kept that reputation in the Bundesliga, and that would go on to shape his career afterwards. Of course, Dortmund wanted him following that, and Jose Mourinho put the block on that. So eventually it was 2015 and not making it in the first team before he went to Wolfsburg. And that was where Kevin De Bruyne's career really took off. He was brilliant in that season that they ended up finishing second and winning the DFB Pokal, beating Klopp's Dortmund in the final. And De Bruyne becoming their most beloved and celebrated playmaker since Zvezdan Misimovic, who, of course, was the guy who supplied all the ammo for Grafich and Edin Dzeko when Wolfsburg won the title in 2009. And we all know what happened with Kevin De Bruyne afterwards. But again, I think this leans in to the fact that players coming directly from Belgium to the Premier League in England and succeeding was not really a thing. Now, let's look at some of the other players from Belgium's golden generation, those who got the country to the 2018 World Cup semi-final and to the brink of beating France and maybe, who knows, going all the way out there in Russia. Now, I think If we look at Toby Alderweireld, of course, he'd already proved himself in a top league before he ended up in the Premier League at Southampton and then at Spurs, of course, where he became a legend. He was a league winner with Atletico Madrid in 2014. And he, like Thomas Vermaelen and Jan Vertonghen, the next two that I want to talk about, he had already come through a really respected academy in Ajax. So not through a Belgian academy, at least not in the end bit of their formation. And so that wasn't really Premier League clubs going and looking for talent in Belgium, even if they did end up with Belgian talent. And I think you can say the same thing for Moussa Dembélé at Spurs, who was established in senior Dutch football with AZ before he came to Fulham in 2010. Eden Hazard, the biggie, perhaps, who came from Lille, of course, just a little hop over the border from his home in Tubize to Lille, where he developed, became a star, got in the first team at 16, and then part of that team that won the double before he ended up going to Chelsea after they'd won the Champions League final in 2012. And even, I guess, the guys who we recognise from that era of Belgian players, that excellent era of Belgian players, as having gone directly from Belgian clubs to the Premier League. So I guess Romelu Lukaku, Marouane Fellaini, they were guys who had to prove themselves at lower to middling Premier League teams, I think it's fair to say, at West Brom and Everton, before they made it to that elite bracket in the Premier League. So what about the current generation? Well, for me, when I'm looking at the young talent that's going to propel Belgium forward, and if not make them likely to win a World Cup or a European Championship in the next little while, at least keep them competitive, whoever the coach is after Rudi Garcia, you've got to look at the wide guys. You've got to look at Jeremy Doku and Malik Fofana, who are, I think, the players who can excite us as supporters and really lead Belgium forward and make them creative and interesting in the next little while. Now, of course, Jeremy Doku already really proven at Premier League and Champions League level with Manchester City, but of course didn't come directly from Belgium to the Premier League. He came through the Anderlecht Academy, and then Rennes went out there. Rennes, who are very well known for their own players from their own academy. They paid 26 million euros for Doku. And after a couple of years in France, Manchester City took him on and Pep Guardiola developed him at an incredible pace. Now, Malik Fofana, I guess, is one of the big successes of the John Textor era at Lyon, which is at least partially at an end now, but they paid a substantial amount of money to Genk, who we were talking about before. Again, great producers of youth players, 16 million euros. And Fofana actually has been much better in France and much more eye-catching in France than Doku ever was for Rennes, despite costing a bit less. And I would imagine that he is going to end up at one of the elite clubs in Europe at the end of this season. So I think it will probably be Bayern Munich, but there's no doubt there's Premier League interest in Malik Fofana as well. So if we're thinking of their contemporaries, though, maybe they will come directly from Belgium. Now, I guess the one that I'm really watching at Club Brugge, for example, is Romeo Vermant, who's already made his full Belgium debut. 21 years old, forward, who you can really imagine succeeding in the Premier League. And I think when you look at that Club Brugge team being marshalled still by Hans Vanaken, you can imagine a lot of those players coming through. And I can see them coming directly from the Belgian Jupiler Pro League. I can imagine them coming directly from the Jupiler Pro League to the Premier League. And what are the reasons for that? Well, there are a couple of different reasons. Firstly, I think we have to look at how Club Brugge have changed in recent years. Now, previous European Cup finalists, but like Ajax, who we were talking about before, that was in a completely different era. They've kind of rebuilt their image in recent years by succeeding in the Champions League, as well as winning multiple pro leagues as well. And it's no small thing for a team outside the top 5 leagues of Europe to succeed in the Champions League to at least some level. Of course, they knocked out Atalanta on their way to the last 16 last season, which is a good example of that. And I think that gives them a couple of things. Firstly, it gives them a platform for those players that we were talking about that Premier League clubs might want to buy. It also gives them an innate self-confidence, and most importantly, of course, it gives them money. And you look at the fact, for example, that Club Brugge were able to go out this summer and buy Carlos Forbes, who didn't quite work out in the Premier League, but is someone who was on the fringes of the Portugal squad and has cracked the full Portugal squad since he's been in Brugge. Of course, he had that outstanding performance in the 3-3 draw with Barcelona in the Champions League in the league phase. So this shows you that there's that strength. Also, the other thing is you don't have those clubs in France anymore, especially with the decline of the TV deal, at least in the short term until they get their current model up and running in France. Means that you don't have the funding really from a lot of French clubs to go and buy those Belgian players and be that intermediate stage for them. So could Lyon afford a Malik Fofana if he emerged today? Or probably not, actually. They're probably looking for smaller deals, of course, notwithstanding the Endrick deal, which is an extraordinary short-term one, amazingly minimal cost to them as well. So nothing to do with their current financial means or lack of it. And the other end of this is the Premier League clubs themselves, of course. Now, of course, we know there's a huge gap between Premier League clubs and their wealth and the wealth of most other clubs in Europe or lack thereof. But there has been a bit of a credit crunch in the Premier League in the last year and a half, 2 years, because of PSR, profit and sustainability rules. So that means, I think for the first time in a long time, Premier League clubs are less relaxed about what they're spending. They are no longer prepared to be the cash machine for the lesser leagues in Europe as they see them. Financially, they're all lesser leagues than the Premier League, of course. So what does this mean? This means A, they're looking at where they can get value. And B, they're looking at going directly to source, which is partly a financial thing and partly, I think, another legacy of Pep Guardiola and the fact that there's more of an insistence really on keeping your talent in-house from an earlier age. You look at the development of Phil Foden, for example, and rather than loaning him out, how they kept him in to breed him in the ways that they would need to get him into a good first team player for Manchester City as he has been. So I think we will see a lot more travel directly between Belgium and England in the near future. Thanks for joining us. We'll speak to you again next month.